Good morning, Dr. Snape.
Good morning, sir.
So that means you can hear me. You can see me as well?
Well, I can see you, I can hear you. Thank you very much.
Good. Well, you now, I think, have the same opportunity with Mr. Hill.
Dr. Snape, we're going to start today by looking at non-A, non-B hepatitis. Could we have on screen, please, Sully, WITN 3431001, page 52. This is from your witness statement, Dr. Snape, paragraph 141. You wrote there, and I quote, "I am neither a physician nor a clinical virologist, but I became aware by the mid to late 1970s from Oxford Haemophilia Centre meetings, literature reviews, and reports of non-A non-B hepatitis from PFL's relatively small pool factor 8 and factor 9 concentrates, of post-treatment reports of an apparently mild form of hepatitis with no apparent serious sequelae, and for which hepatitis A, hepatitis B, and obstructive jaundice had been excluded as possible causes." That is then a reference to your awareness from the mid to late 1970s of non-A, non-B hepatitis. Is that right?
That's correct.
Why did you think at that time that it was an apparently mild form of hepatitis?
It would be wrong to talk about it being my thinking. I think my thinking reflected what I heard being reported to me from physicians. Not to say that they were dismissive of the apparently mild hepatitis, lack of sequelae, but that in comparison with the changes that treatment with clotting factor concentrates brought about, these were, I believe, seen as acceptable side effects, short-term side effects.
The physicians with whom you were having these discussions, were they principally from the Oxford Haemophilia Centre?
From the Haemophilia Centre, I also recall a fairly stern lecture from Professor Ari Zuckerman at the time, who was recommending that we didn't, that we established follow-up in the sense of recording which batches reflected patient sequelae, and that we reported those to John Krask, to the working party when it was established.
Did you take steps to do that, both at PFL and BPL?
I can't speak for BPL in that timeline. We certainly took steps to do it at PFL. Again, it was pre-computer technology, but we set up a system of 7x5 cards and flagged reports of apparent non-A, non-B jaundice on those cards. And each card, when a card reached 4 flags from patient reports, then that would be, information would have been passed on to Jean Spooner, who was secretary to John Krask's working party.
To the best of your knowledge, in the mid to late 1970s, do you recall discussion taking place about potential long-term sequelae to non-A, non-B hepatitis?
Not at that time, no. I became more aware of such discussions as we progressed into the early 80s, 81 through 82.
We'll come back to those discussions in a second. I just want to quickly refer to paragraph 144 of your statement. I don't ask for it to be brought up, but you say there that there was some evidence at that time that voluntary unpaid donor sources may be a lower risk, but they were certainly not risk-free. Is that a reflection of your position in the late 1970s?
Yes, I think we had to regard them as clearly not risk-free, because there were the reports that we received of jaundice post-treatment.
Later,
So they couldn't be risk-free.
Later, what did the research show about the comparative safety of UK and US factor concentrates in terms of non-A, non-B infections?
There was an. If you look at
just a moment. Isn't that really a question for me from the literature? I think it might be appropriate to ask Dr. Snape what he knew at the time about it.
What did you know come the, say, mid-1980s about the comparative risk of UK and US fractionated concentrate?
At the time, if I wasn't attending the Haemophilia Centre Directors meetings or the Hepatitis Working Party, I was certainly receiving information back from them. And for me, there was an interesting volte-face over a very short period, about 11 months, from the Hepatitis Working Party in autumn 1981, when the position was still being held that NHS concentrates were less likely to transmit to previously unexposed donors. And 11, 12 months later, at the Hepatitis Working Party in 1982, the position had changed, and the perspective then, or the perception then, was that there was pretty much equal likelihood of transmission from NHS concentrates and commercial concentrates. And that was then firmed up not much later by the paper from Peter Kernoff and his group, confirming 10 out of 12 transmissions by NHS concentrates to previously untreated patients.
I'd like to take you to a memorandum that went in under the name of Dr. Lane to the Social Services Committee of the House of Commons on the 25th of March 1987. Sully, it's at LDOW 40247. We could have the first page of that, first of all, please. We can see there that this is the formal report from the committee. And we can see that the minutes of evidence are from the 25th of March 1987. And those attending were Dr. Harold Gunson from NBTS, and from BPL, Dr. Lane, Mr. Crowley, you, and Dr. Smith. And then Professor Ian Kennedy also gave evidence there. Could we turn, please, to page 6 of these minutes? This is the first page of a memorandum submitted by Dr. Lane entitled The Manufacture of Therapeutic Products from Human Plasma. Were you involved in producing this memorandum for the House of Commons?
No, not Richard Lane's paper, no.
Did you see it before it was submitted?
I'm sure I would have done, it wouldn't have been usual for Dr. Lane to put me in the position of attending a hearing like that and not having prepared me. I don't remember seeing Dr. Gunson's paper, but I'm sure I must have seen Richard Lane's paper.
Presumably, Dr. Lane would have taken some care about the creation of a paper, given that it was going to be presented to Parliament.
I'm sure he did.
Could we go, please, to page 8? If we could just look at the paragraph starting by 1981, under the subheading Focus on Factor 8Y. At the top of the screen, you can see that paragraph. It reads as follows. By 1981, awareness of the serious nature of non-A, non-B hepatitis in haemophiliacs was shared by clinicians and BPL scientific staff alike. First of all, would you agree that by 1981, awareness of the serious nature of non-A, non-B hepatitis was shared by BPL scientific staff?
I would agree that certainly as fractionators, we took it seriously. My earlier comment about the shift from Autumn 81 to Autumn 82 was about the perspective of whether NHS concentrates were more or less likely than commercial concentrates to be responsible for transmission. But that doesn't mean that even in Autumn 81, it wasn't being taken seriously.
Do you know the reason why Dr. Lane selected that date by 1981?
I would imagine that he would have been reflecting on the minutes, which I'm sure he had and referred to, of the Hepatitis Working Party chaired by John Crass.
Dr. Lane says there that that was a view that was shared by clinicians and BPL scientific staff alike. Are you aware of any difference in view about the seriousness of non-A, non-B between fractionators and clinicians at that time?
The only difference I would point to is that it seemed to me, my impression was that although physicians treating haemophiliacs and also reflecting the views of haemophiliacs themselves saw the non-A, non-B hepatitis transmission as less of a threat than the consequences of not treating patients to deal with joint bleeds and other serious bleeds. As fractionators, we had a different perspective. Our job was to try to reflect on potential risks in our products and to put in place mechanisms to limit those risks or eliminate those risks. Now, virus transmission was clearly a risk and it was presenting itself. Whilst we may have been in the beginning of putting together thinking on virus inactivation and virus elimination, what we were doing is looking at issues like donor selection, like our working practices that would give us the basis for producing safe and effective products.
We heard from Dr. Smith's evidence last week, where he said that fractionators were much more concerned than clinicians about non-A, non-B in the early stages, partly because of earlier awareness of potential product liability cases. The reference about a CBLA 5016_034. Is that a view that you would agree with?
I would agree with it. I would say that Dr. Smith was especially sensitive to issues of hepatitis resulting from fractionation because of the outbreak in the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary whilst he was still up there before the building of the new PFC. And he did not treat hepatitis of any form trivially.
I'd like to move on now to pool sizes. And if we could go, please, to WITN 3431001, page 86. This is back to your statement. Forgive me, Sally, I've given you the wrong page number. It's page 58. I'm just going to read paragraphs 100 and 161 from your statement to you. Since the 1970s, it's the top of that page, please, Sally. Since the 1970s, it has been argued, and largely accepted, that increased pool size and the use of paid donors carry greater risk of infection than the use of small pools from voluntary unpaid donations. The protection afforded by the use of unpaid donations is directly translated to recipients of single donor products, unless the recipient is unfortunate enough to be treated with the one unrecognised infective donation, but greatly diminished when donations from many donors, even voluntary unpaid donors, are mixed and used in one pool to produce coagulation factors. In the absence of reliable screening tests, and there was none for the entity causing NA-NB hepatitis in the early to mid-1980s, the larger the donor pool size, the greater the risk of unwittingly including an infective donation. Since pools had to be above a certain size for cost-effective production of the amounts of concentrate demanded for treatment of affected individuals, and to achieve the range of antibodies required for some immunoglobulin preparations, pools of more than 1,000 donations specified, the risk of non-A, non-B hepatitis infection was significant. Risks associated with increased donor pool size or donor selection issues implicit in the use of paid donor plasma were most significant for coagulation factor concentrates, which enjoyed neither the protection afforded by the presence of neutralizing antibodies, intramuscular immunoglobulins, nor the benefit of in-process virus inactivation, either deliberate, albumin, or serendipitous immunoglobulins. Prior to the advent of effective virus inactivation methods, there was therefore a significant risk of infectivity from all coagulation factor concentrates made from pooled plasma, including those products made by BPL. The incidence of infection would have been determined by the amount of virus in the product being administered. There was a consensus view, in the UK at least, that coagulation factor concentrates made from unpaid UK donors carried a lower virus burden than those made from donations from paid US donors. Certainly US fractionation pools were much larger, up to 20,000 donations used in a plasma pool, but more important was the failure at the time of the paid donor system to exclude donors with lifestyle risk factors. Do I take it correctly from what you've said there that there was a recognition that as a general proposition, and all other things being equal, the greater the pool size, the greater the risk of it containing an infected donation?
I should have qualified it in the sense that once you exceed the pool size necessary, let me start again. For donor plasma of the same quality, i.e. for a properly qualified donor, the pool size as a risk increases as risk increases as pool size increases. There comes a point when if, for example, we're talking about 1 in 100 donors being infective for non-A, non-B hepatitis, or for that matter, hepatitis B, then once you exceed the 1 in 100, certainly once you exceed the 500 that we initially specified at PFL, the 1,000 donors that we moved on to after that, then there is a diminishing return in terms of the risk of infection. I think what I was also trying to say, perhaps a little clumsily, is that if donor characteristics were not controlled, if the selection of donors didn't deliberately exclude high-risk donors, then I wouldn't say that pool size is irrelevant, but if you have significant number of donors who are contributing regularly, many times a year, to a pool, then that pool is more effective than a pool of well-qualified donors who are included perhaps twice a year in a plasma pool.
You mention in those paragraphs the balance that the fractionator has to strike between pool size and efficiency. I wonder if you could just expand on that a little for us, please.
Yes, I mean, as batch, and I'm not going to use the term pool size, as batch size decreases, then the process is less efficient. Less efficient because of the fractionation equipment that's used, because of losses in process. Also less efficient because of the proportion of samples that doesn't diminish predictably, the samples that are taken for quality control testing to approve a product for release, including, as we saw yesterday, the submission of samples to the official control authority.
Could I just ask you to explain why you've chosen the term batch size rather than pool size?
Because it's batch size that determines efficiency. It is more efficient. You can achieve greater efficiency by manufacturing a 2,500 kilos of plasma batch than by processing 10 250 kilo batches. And those numbers have got nothing to do with donor pool size. They're simply the mechanics of the fractionation process and the sampling and testing that follows from it. Every one of those 250 batches carries a penalty of an irreducible penalty of somewhere around 20 to 25 vials of final product that has to be sacrificed for sterility testing, for pyrogen testing, for all of the potency testing that happens, and add to that then the vials going off to the official control authority. So that's batch size that's driving efficiency there.
May I just ask a question? What do you understand by efficiency in this context? Because efficiency can have many different meanings, perhaps depending upon the desired result.
You're quite right, sir. Efficiency in the context that we're talking about, what I was referring to was what proportion of the product, of the factor 8 in the however many donations in the starting pool can be recovered into vials and presented to the patient for clinical use.
Thank you.
Does it follow from what you have just said that if a system had been put in place for fractionating smaller pool sizes at BPL, then the result would have been less factor 8 concentrate produced at BPL?
Yes, that's my opinion.
It would then have been for the clinicians to decide what they were going to do to make up any shortfall. Is that right?
It would have been, but before that, it would have been our job, the fractionator's job, to decide what represented the greatest risk. Making product from large manufacturing batches, whether that created a situation in which the product was less safe than the lesser amount of product from small batches.
That was a decision for the fractionators at BPL.
In discussion with the agencies, and of course, one would have to involve the clinicians in that discussion. One would have to involve the control agents in that discussion, because we all had contributions to make.
Ultimately, whose decision was it to decide on the size of the pool sizes at BPL?
I believe that decision came out of meetings in the executive committee and the R&D working party.
Were you present at those meetings where pool sizes were discussed?
I'm sure I would have been. I don't remember particular, and I certainly can't quote you particular minutes of meetings where they were discussed.
You say the decision would have emerged from the meeting. Ultimately, at a meeting, somebody is going to have to say what they think the answer should be. Whose voice would carry the most weight at those meetings?
Obviously, the chief executive's voice would carry most weight, but I think at the time, our chief executive was listening very carefully to the guidance that he got from the production team, from R&D, and from QA. You also have to remember that those discussions were going on not in advance of building the factory, but while the factory was being built. And whilst the facility where for example, factor 8, where that facility was being created, and there would have been influences in terms of what could be changed without delaying the availability of product from that factory.
When you say the chief executive, do you mean the chief executive of CBLA?
The meetings that I'm thinking of, yes.
Yeah. So that would have been.
But not at CBLA meetings. The chief executive, Bernard Crowley, chief executive of CBLA, would have been present at our meetings.
The CBLA was created, I believe, in December 1982. So from that period on, you've described the situation. Are you able to assist with how those decisions were taken, firstly at BPL before the establishment of the CBLA in 1982?
Yes, before 1982, those discussions would have taken place in fora convened either by Richard Lane or for Richard Lane. And they would have included people like Dr. Smith, myself, and the head of R&D, Mike Harvey.
Who would be informed about a decision to increase the pool size?
From my perspective, the decision would always have been taken in discussion with Richard Lane as both director and medical director. But if you're saying who was the decision communicated to once it was taken, the answer is I'm not sure. I don't think I can answer it quite so easily. There was for a long period, as you know, as you saw last with the paper last week, we were putting pool size, number of donations limit on the label. Whether that was a good idea or not, from my perspective, it at least allowed physicians and patients to see what the pool size was. Did we consult with physicians and patients? No, we didn't, except through the Hepatitis Working Party once a year.
Am I right in understanding then that the decision would be taken within BPL, within those structures that you have said, but there would be no formal input from clinicians or patient groups about the decision for the pool sizes?
There would have been no formal input, but we were listening to them.
I'm just going to take you to one document from a little bit later in the piece, DHSC 302303_027. This is from June 1986, and important to remember that it is from that period and not earlier. And it is a letter that you wrote to Dr. Alison Smithies of the Medicines Division of the DHSS. What you wrote is this: maximum donor pool size for coagulation factor concentrates. I am writing to advise you of a proposed change in donor pool size limitation for BPL and PFL coagulation factor concentrates. It is proposed to increase the maximum number of donations to be pooled from 10,000 to 25,000 plasma donations. In taking this decision, we were mindful of the terminal heat treatment of coagulation factor concentrates made from such pools, and the fact that any increase beyond the already large 10,000 donor limit is probably not significant. I thought you should be aware of this proposal. First question following on from that. Am I right to read this as BPL informing the Medicines Division of the proposed change, not asking for permission?
Yes, you're correct in that.
It does.
The decision has already been taken.
It does refer to it as a proposal and not as a decision. Is that just polite language?
So first line, proposed change.
Yes, no,
And proposal in the last word in the before the best wishes.
Perhaps it's polite language. I believe we had already taken the decision. I mean, in my third sentence, in taking this decision, we were mindful of the terminal heat treatment of coagulation factor concentrates from such pools. So I believe we were certainly at the point when we were enacting whatever was necessary to bring about the label change, for example. So yes, I guess it's polite language. Thank you, sir.
Do you know if this form of this way of informing the DHSS by writing to them was a new practice, or had something like that been in existence before?
I'm not aware of all of the situations in which, and it would have been typically Richard Lane who would have made communications like that. I can't remember whether Richard Lane asked me to communicate that information to Alison Smithies. It's unlikely that I would simply have taken it on myself to write. It's more likely that my writing followed up a discussion with Richard Lane, in which he would probably have said something like, I think we should let Alison Smithies know.
If we
But
could...
I don't know if it's a standard practice.
Sorry, I cut across you there. You said, I think you said, I don't know if it was a standard practice.
I don't know if it would have been, I don't believe it would have been standard practice for the department to be notified of every change. But this is a fairly significant change in the sense that it happened after a conscious decision to review risk, having introduced terminal heat treatment, but also taking into account the fact that we were already at 10,000 donors, well beyond the limit when there would have been, even with good donor screening, there would have been infected donations in the pool. That was the purpose of the terminal heat treatment.
And is that why you say that the already large 10,000 donor limit is the increase beyond the already large 10,000 donor limit is probably not significant?
Yes.
Just so that we square this off, if we could have on screen, please, CBLA.
Well, may I just ask, what would have happened if Dr. Smithies had written back and said, well, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I agree with this proposal or this decision?
We would have, sorry, sir.
Or this decision, however she read the letter.
We would have had to take it back to the drawing board and either explore ways of convincing the department that we were right and they were wrong, or I presume comply and not increase the donor pool size.
So the ultimate authority for an increase in the pool size, once reported at least to the department, was the department, in your view?
From my perspective, I would not have proceeded in contravention of the department's wishes. It's quite possible that Richard Lane and the CBLA would have taken a stronger line. I can't comment on that. But I'm sure they wouldn't have done it without further discussion with the department.
Do you recall any incident where there was such pushback from the department?
Off the top of my head, no. But if it occurs to me before the end of today, I'll let you know.
Thank you. Just so that we are aware of some of the background of your letter and to place it within context, could we have on screen, please, CBLA 304791? This is a minute from the same day, 20th of June 1986, from you to Mr. Prince, Dr. Smith, and copied to a number of other people. It states, pool size limitation for heat-treated concentrates. Dr. Lane has agreed that the maximum pool size may be extended to 25,000 donations for heat-treated coagulation factor concentrates. The appropriate label revisions will be made as soon as possible. Please check that any manufacturing document is revised before the increased limit is implemented. So this would seem to confirm that you weren't going off on a frolic of your own. Dr. Lane had been informed and had agreed to the increase in the pool size.
That's correct. Sorry, I interrupted.
I was just going to ask, the language there used in this minute is that Dr. Lane has agreed that the pool size be extended, which taken on its own might indicate that it was Dr. Lane who made those kinds of decisions. Do you think that is a fair interpretation or not?
It's fair to say that he would always have had a loud voice in making the decision. You need to be aware as well, though, that the last sentence means exactly what it says. The manufacturing documentation, the batch record, is what drives the process. It would have been probably a month from the time of that decision to the point where even the manufacturing documentation could have been prepared for the increased pool size, and longer time still before the process had happened. So this wasn't, it certainly wasn't a quick decision. It was a decision that had been long in discussion and thinking about. But yes, Richard Lane would have been the one to underwrite changes like that.
You've spoken in your evidence about how once a certain limit was passed, then the protection offered by small pools was lost. And you did that by reference to knowledge of hepatitis viruses. What thought, if any, was given to the risk posed by unknown viruses? And how did that impact upon decisions on pool size?
Well, I think you have it already. Non-A, non-B hepatitis was an unknown virus. What we were seeing was the consequences of the presence of an unknown, unidentified, unmeasured, untested virus. So you see evidence of a risk, you respond to that evidence of risk and set out to reduce the risk. I've said before, and I know that Dr. Smith took the same view in papers that he produced, that when we were planning for heat treatment, we were thinking about unknown viruses. Even when HTLV3 was identified, and if you like, the terminal dry heat treatment came as what should have been a timely correction of the presence of HTLV3, but our focus, the driver, certainly from a fractionator's point of view at Elstree and at PFL, was this beast, non-A, non-B hepatitis that we've been aware of.
I'd like to turn now to some of the evidence about what the pool sizes were and how they increased. You gave some evidence about that yesterday when you said that in terms of routine production, the smallest size that you could remember at PFL from early in your career was, I think you said, around 65 litres, about 12 of the 5-litre bags being used in fractionation. Is that a fair summary of what you said yesterday?
I think I said 13. I would normally say 13 bags. 13. It probably around somewhere between 325 and 350 donations, yes.
In your written statement at page 76, paragraph 214, if we could have that on screen, Sully. WITN 3431001, page 76, paragraph 214. I stress that yesterday we were talking about your direct experience of having worked at PFL from 1970 onwards. in this paragraph of your witness statement, you go back a little further in time. You wrote, and I quote, between 1967 and 1975, the plasma pool size for BPL and PFL factor 8 batches ranged from 50 to 100 litres, 250 to 500 donations. Could I just ask about that figure of 50 litres and 250 donors? Do you know where that comes from?
If you're asking me, can I pin it down to a piece of paper? No, I can't. But in discussion, when I first joined PFL, I was aware from discussions with Ethel Bidwell, with Ross Dyke, of the pool sizes they'd been working with when I visited Elstree very early on in my career in discussions with Drummond Ellis. It was obvious that there had been smaller pools being fractionated at the scale that PFL would have then almost carried on with under my guise as scientist IC production. I can't give you names.
No, thank you. If we could...
But may I just ask, if you just have a look, you've given a range here of 50 to 100, and yesterday you told us about the figure of 70. Can I just remind you of what was said, paragraph 86 of your witness statement, is page 31. It's where you say initially the process used for factor 8 manufacture at PFL and BPL was a method developed in Sweden by Blombach. Now, you later on described going on to the Johnson process. And that was, what, 1974 onwards, was it, the Johnson process?
That's correct.
So before 1974, you'd be using the Blombach method. And you see here, we worked with plasma batch sizes of up to 70 litres. That's a slightly different figure from 100. So were you giving the range of 50 to 100 just to make sure you didn't miss anything that might be a bit larger?
Well, I'll comment on
how does that fit with the 50 to 100? That's what I'm really asking.
The 50 to 100, I think, related to the process at PFL and BPL. I think I'm probably being careless in paragraph 86. We worked with plasma batch sizes of up to 70 litres. I was talking about myself and PFL in that sentence. That wasn't intended to embrace BPL as well. But certainly from 1970 through to the end of our processing by Blombach, we would have been using batches of approximately 65 to 70 litres from 13 5-liter packs of plasma.
Thank you.
If we could turn to BPLL 309120, the first page of that, please. This is a document that was introduced in the presentations a couple of weeks ago. We can see from the first page that it is a memorandum from Dr. Lane to you, dated the 29th of January 1990, so at the time of the HIV litigation. Dr. Lane wrote, a number of matters are arising out of reading of files for the litigation. I attach a list below and should appreciate answers as soon as possible from the individuals best able to provide the information. 1. approximate pool size in kilograms of factor 8 pools from 1975 onwards at Oxford and Elstree with dates of change. So that was the task set out by Dr. Lane. And if we could turn to page 2. We can see here a table is set out of PFL products. Now, in our presentation, we referred to these as your estimates because the memorandum had been sent to you. But is that accurate? Were these estimates that you came to, or was there some other individual who was better placed to provide this information for Dr. Lane?
Almost certainly, at the time that I received Richard Lane's memo, I would have asked members of staff in the control unit, headed up at that time by David Donald, but David wouldn't have done the data mining himself. It would have been one of the technical staff in the control unit who would have gone through batch records to pull those batch sizes out. We did not have, even in 1990, and certainly we're talking about data here back to the 1970s, this was not on any database. Someone would have gone through a stack of archived batch records, pulling out batch sizes to give those figures there. And that would have included, in the case of factor 9, for example, the pooling of supernatants from 2 batches of factor 8 to make factor 9 concentrate.
I'm going to come back and ask you about that pooling in a second, but let's just, for the transcript, go through the figures that are given here for PFL products. From 1975 to 1979, for factor 8, the approximate batch size in plasma weight is given as 100 kilograms, and for factor 9, 100 to 200 kilograms. 1980, factor 8, the figure is given as 300 to 500 kilograms. Factor 9, the same, 300 to 500 kilograms. And then 1983, factor 8 only, and the figure is given 300 kilograms and multiples of 300 kilograms. And a note says 1980 onwards, an increase in hemonetics plasma usage, therefore reducing donor exposure per batch. Just to deal with that last point first, hemonetics plasma, is that plasma obtained from plasmapheresis?
It is, yes.
Therefore, more plasma can be obtained, and thus a 300 kilogram batch will have fewer donations in it.
That's correct.
The figure for factor 9 in 1975 to 1979, 100 to 200 kilograms, does that reflect what you have just said, that pools, the supernatant that resulted from the fractionation of factor 8 was mixed together in order to make the factor 9?
It may not have been quite as you described it. It may not have been that the supernatants were pooled, but rather the factor 9 concentrate, the bulk factor 9 concentrates from 2 column extractions might well have been pooled to achieve the 200 kilograms. But I think it's, and I need to just repeat that what the person doing the data mining was doing was using actual numbers recorded for how many kilos of plasma. Working with plasma products, it's not like making paracetamol where you put a predefined amount of the material into a batch. The batch size is what appears on the scale of the floor balance when the pooled plasma is in the tank and measured. And so it would be it would be different for every batch. It could be 5 or 10 kilos different for each batch, but I'm sure that what the technician who did that data mining was doing was simply recording the number of kilos in each batch and then calculating an average.
In terms of the number of donations that went into each kilo, before 1980, is our rough rule of thumb of about 5 per litre, 5 per kilo, still a reasonable guide?
Before 1980 and the introduction of plasmapheresis plasma, and before the introduction of SAGM, then yes, the rule of thumb 5 is fine.
After 1980, it's more complicated and harder to come up with a precise metric.
Because of pheresis plasma, because of SAGM plasma.
In 1983, the reference error is to 300 kilograms and multiples of 300 kilograms. Do you understand what was meant by that?
I would have interpreted, I do interpret that as meaning the cryoprecipitate from more than one batch, from more than one process batch would have been frozen and then pooled for finishing manufacture.
If we can just jump back in time a little to a memorandum that was brought up during our presentations a couple of weeks ago. It is CBLA 40253. And it is sent from Dr. Bidwell, head of lab at PFL, to Dr. Maycock, and it's dated the 22nd of January 1975. I'm afraid, so far as we are able to discover at the moment, it sits on its own, so we don't have any other papers that we can show you to give you context. What it states is this. When we talked about labels at Elstree in November, we agreed to have printed on the label for Factor 8 that it was derived from, quotes, not more than 500 donations, and that we would cease putting on the precise number of donors whose plasma had gone to make up the pool. Mr. Snape has pointed out to me that the batches of Factor 9 prepared from the Elstree material correspond to much higher than 500 donations, and that the exact number is not known to us. If we pool the smaller batches here, we know the number, but again it is more than 500. I have told Mr. Snape to have printed on the new labels not more than 1,000 donations, but the whole subject of having anything at all on the labels seems difficult. It is certainly not much of a guide to the clinicians any longer. Can we discuss this, please? I'm afraid a rather lazy question, but can you explain to us what is behind this minute?
The 500 or the 1,000 donor limit, you're asking what's behind that?
What is behind the concern that you have raised with Ms. Bidwell that she is now raising with Dr. Maycock?
Okay, simply that we wouldn't necessarily, when we received supernatant from Elstree, we wouldn't have had the precise batch size available to us. We certainly wouldn't have had the number of donations available to us. And I'm sure it was me simply being cautious and not wanting to be caught out at a later date.
Do you know how this matter was resolved following the minute?
I do know that we increased the label statement to 1,000 donations. I also know that the practice of putting a donation limit on labels persisted for a very long time, probably longer than was useful. I think Ethel Bidwell's comment that the number of donations stated on the label wasn't much of a guide to clinicians anymore was quite true. I don't know what discussions Dr. Maycock and Dr. Bidwell had as a result, but clearly we persisted with a label statement, but increased to 1,000 donations.
Do you know of any incidents or any period of time when vials of factor 8 or factor 9 were sent out from either BPL or PFL with inaccurate labels as to how many donations they had within them?
No, I don't. I'll just qualify something that you're saying. For a long time, all factor 9 was being issued from PFL, whether it had been manufactured at PFL or BPL or sourced at BPL. But no, I don't know of any such event. And if I'd known at the time, there would have been a correction made.
Could we go back, please, Sully, to the previous document that we were looking at, the estimates of pool size, BPLL 309120, and this time to page 3. We looked at the figures for the PFL products. We're now going to turn to the products from Elstree, from BPL. We can see the table produced there. The first row doesn't have a batch number, but has date released 1975, plasma weight around 150 kilos, number of donations around 750 kilos. That's the first figure that is entered there. Asking the impossible, but do you know why no batch number is given?
No.
Thereafter, for the other figures in the table, we have specific batch numbers given. Does that mean that whoever compiled these figures would have gone to the documents for that batch and found out what the weight of the plasma was?
That's exactly what they would have done. But the donation, the number in the number of donations column would, I'm sure, have been a conversion from the plasma weight.
Having done the maths, until November 1986, the conversion is simply plasma weight times 5 to give donation weight. And after from February 1988 onwards, the conversion is around about 4.2 times the plasma weight to get to the donation figure. Is that presumably to reflect the greater use of SAG-M?
That would have been one factor, certainly. It doesn't surprise me that the shift occurs at between 8Y3429 and the FHC batch 001. It certainly would reflect more SAG-M use.
FHC, what does that stand for, please?
I hoped you weren't going to ask me that. I can't remember. It's 30-something years ago, and I wouldn't have generated the acronym myself. I don't remember. Sorry.
I was just going to ask, was it a fundamentally different product from 8Y?
No.
Still a heat-treated product done in approximately the same way as 8Y?
Yes.
I won't test you any further then on the acronyms. I won't go through all of these figures because we have them both on this document and in the earlier presentation. But what we can see from them is an increase, just using the approximate number of donors figure. From 1975, it's 750. It has risen to 2,250 in September 1977. then to 3,000 for August 1980, 4,500 from March 1981, and then 6,000 in July 1982, April 1985, July 1985. It rises to 7,000 in November 1986, 10,000 in February 1988, 13,500 in June 1988, and then finally 14,500 in December 1988 and July 1989. Firstly, those figures are the figures for what actually went into those batches rather than the maximum donor figure which appears on some of the labels. Is that right?
That's correct. Can I also comment that if you look at the, rather than the number of donations column, if you look at the plasma weight column, apart from the batch with no name, you can see that the progression, I mean, we have the HL 1350 with 450 kilos, but after that, you're seeing multiples increasing on units of 300 or units of 150, if you like, all the way through. And some of that would reflect pooling of frozen cryoprecipitates to make a batch, but still subject to a calculated total donation limit that would have appeared on the label.
If I could just highlight the period from August 1980 to July 1982, we see a doubling in the size of the batch, 600 kilos to 1,200 kilos, approximately 3,000 donors to approximately 6,000 donors. We can see from the final column that that is a period when the product was not heat treated. And we know from your earlier evidence that this is a period by which time the fractionators were aware and taking seriously the long-term risks of non-A, non-B hepatitis. There was no test for non-A, non-B hepatitis at that time, was there?
There was no test for non-A, non-B hepatitis at that time, but there were controlling elements in terms of donor selection and the type the questionnaire that would have been administered at the donor collection center inquiring about donor perception of risk.
That was the only mechanism to try to control the risk of non-A, non-B that was being used at that time. Is that fair?
It's the only mechanism that was available to us. We could test for hepatitis B. We certainly couldn't test for an entity that hadn't been identified and associated with a particular virus.
But by that time, and in light of those figures that we've looked at, BPL wasn't using pool size as a form of protection against non-A, non-B hepatitis. Is that a fair comment?
Subject to the maximum number of donations that at any one time was agreed and specified on the label.
And just to finish this section on pool sizes, if I could just ask a couple of hypothetical questions. If a decision had been taken to retain pool sizes or to have made pool sizes at BPL of, say, maximum 250, 300 donors, what would have been the result of that decision in terms of the amount of product that was produced?
it's unlikely that it would have constrained the equipment that was in use. But what it would have done is increase the number of vials per batch that had to be sacrificed for testing and submission for control authority review. So the number of vials that would have been issued to the patient would have been smaller.
Once we get into the early 1980s, knowing what we do about the way that BPL had developed, was it possible to reconfigure Building 25 or any other building on the site to arrange for fractionation through small pools of, say, 200, 250, 300 donors without affecting the amount of product that was produced?
In Building 25?
Yes.
In the old BPL?
Yes.
No. No, it couldn't have been done, well, in my opinion.
So if a decision had been taken in, say, 1980, 1981, that BPL should no longer fractionate with donations measured in the thousands, but should fractionate with donations measured in the low hundreds, how would that have been achieved?
Okay, you're taxing my physical memory of BPL now, but I cannot think of a conjunction of rooms that could have been used to achieve that. I would have to say that I think the only way it could have been done would have been to reconfigure the rooms that were at that time being used to manufacture factor 8 and factor 9, which would have meant downtime while the reconfiguration happened, and possibly different equipment. You really are pushing me to limits of memory now.
I will leave it there in that case. We know from your statement, and it's paragraph 104 at page 37, and also from the evidence of Dr. Smith that we presented a couple of weeks ago, that consideration was given to including an area for very small pool concentrates during the design of Building 27, the new BPL.
I think just small pool concentrates rather than very small. Both expressions are used in paragraph 104, but the designated area is in quotes, is small pool products. So you may be right to say very small. The words are there, but it's the designation is small product. What the difference is simply one of emphasis and whether the word belongs or not.
Perhaps I can see that Dr. Snape is looking for it now. Perhaps we'll bring it up on screen so that he has it in front of him. WITN 3431001. It's page 37, sorry. Paragraph 104.
And you were asking about the design of BPL, the new design, and it's the second sentence, I think, there that relates to that. That's how I read it, anyway.
So we can see BPL, I quote from it, BPL gave serious consideration to the preparation of very small pool, less than 10 plasma donation concentrates of both factor 8 and prothrombin complex factors 2, 9, and 10 during the early years of design and construction of the new factory, Building 27. My memory is that in the 1982 design and 2 years into the facility construction, around 1984, a substantial area was designated, quote, small pool products. Never commissioned for small pool product manufacture as such, this area would be seized on shortly before factory completion, circa 1986, for use for the virus safe processing steps of 8Y and 9A. First of all, Dr. Snape, I'm conscious that you have told us that you weren't involved in the redesigning of 27. Are you able to assist with whether these are two separate entities, the very small pool plan in the first sentence and then the small pool plan in the second sentence?
I believe they referred to the same concept, and the very small pools referred to in the first sentence was what was intended to be processed in the designated small pool products area in sentence 2.
But ultimately, that didn't go ahead, and the area was used for something else. Is that right?
That's correct. When the factory was in advanced design phase, we still hadn't settled on virus-safe processing for factor 8 and factor 9. There was no area in the factory on any drawing in 1984, for example, that would have said virus inactivation for 8Y or virus inactivation 9A, because that process had not been established, had not been defined. Come 1986, it was necessary to start to think about the flow of products through the factory to a virus-safe processing step. A lot of the interaction, there was a lot of interaction between manufacturers and the regulatory agencies at that time around what kind of separation had to be introduced between pre and post virus inactivation. Now, 8Y and 9A had the excellent characteristic that the virus inactivation happened in the final vial by heat treatment after the product had been dried. But there were other products that we were manufacturing that couldn't be handled in that way, where we had to demonstrate consistently steps from one part of the factory that we would have designated pre-virus inactivation and another part that we would have designated post-virus inactivation. And so it was necessary, I use the term seized on, and that's in a sense what we were doing. We were, the factory design at that stage was taking advantage of some space that wasn't going to be otherwise used.
So I wonder if that might be an opportune moment. I'm about to move on to.
Well, it will be subject to a couple of questions, if I may. Can we just go in your statement to the next couple of pages, 2 pages further on, page 39? And this is a paragraph you were taken to yesterday. If you look about 10 lines down, you see the sentence at the end of the line beginning, both of these events occurred in 1982, when the donor pool size had just been increased to 7,500 donations. And you're talking here about the 2 occasions in which batches had to be disposed of because they proved to be infective because of errors in the Isle of Man in one case and there was some other error in the other. And then you go on. There are 2 questions which arise out of this. One is how that figure, 7,500 donations, which if you're using a conversion factor of 5, would give you what? It would give you 1,500, I think.
1,500.
And how that fits, if you go down to the bottom of the paragraph. Now, stop there. Thank you, Sally. You see the sentence beginning, in each case, the cost of the service was the cost of a 2,500 kilogram plasma pool. So in each case, the cost of the service was the cost of a 2,500 kilogram plasma pool. The way it's written, it sounds as though each pool that was disposed of, which would have had no more than a maximum of 7,500 donations, that is 1,500 kilograms, was in fact 2,500 kilograms. I just want to understand what the mathematics is there.
I think I don't know when the mathematics went wrong, but the mathematics clearly did go wrong. You're quite right. I mean, the pool, even allowing for some variability, we're still talking about, with a 7,500 donation pool, we're talking about a 1,500 kilogram pool. So that I'm fairly sure that when I wrote the witness statement, I was reflecting on donation pool size. I'm afraid that's my error, and I can't explain how it occurred.
I mean, it might be, one explanation which occurred to me, might be that you meant to say it cost in total 2,500 kilograms, which might be the result of both batches put together. But the way it's written, it suggests it's two batches of 2,500 kilograms.
No, I think my phraseology saying in each case, my phraseology was meaning each being the same, and it's the number that's wrong. It wasn't 2,500 kilograms. It should be, if I was going to say anything, it should have been 1,500 kilograms.
Okay. Bear in mind the figures there. The pool size has just been increased to 7,500 donations. And then you were taken by Mr. Hill to the memo where we had that debate about whether proposal meant decision or not. That was 20th of June 1986, when Dr. Smithies at the Department of Health was told of the proposed increase from a maximum pool size of 10,000 to 25,000 donations. Now that's in relation to BPL, Elstree. Can you help with how that fits with the document that you were taken to just shortly ago, BPL L 309120?
Sorry, sir, I would have to see the document.
Well, that's why I'm quoting it, so that Sally gets it up. It's the document we were looking at with a list of donations from the average, the pool sizes that you pulled out for him. Thank you. Now, these appear to be looking at individual batches and the plasma weight and the number of donations. But how does the number of donations there fit with what you remembered from 1982, the 7,500, and the memo saying we're increasing the pool size from 10,000 to 25,000 donations, when at no time in that table do you ever reach the 25,000. You don't get to the 10,000 until February 88, yet this memo is in June 86. How does it all fit together? I know that there weren't records kept as a formal record of average pool size, but can you help to just give me some understanding of what I should take from all this?
I think my suggestion would be that the focus should be on the plasma weight in the first instance, and the plasma weight would have been what the technician who was pulling out that data was could be relied on to be quoting. So around July 82, we were seeing plasma weights of 1,200 kilos, which would translate by a simple calculation to 6,000 donations. But that wasn't the limit at the time. I think we have to separate what was actually happening, which is what's reflected in this table, from the limit that would have been placed on the label at the time.
So what was the, I understand that, and this may reflect either individual batches or it may reflect the average of what was being done. But what would the purpose have been in seeking an increase from 10,000 donations to 25,000 donations if what was actually happening was that for 3 years, no more than 10,000 were being used?
I can't answer at this remove, sir. All I can do is look at the data that I see there, which I'm sure is the recorded batch size, then a conversion to donations. I'm finding it hard to then imagine the dates on which the proposals for batch size change took place alongside this table.
I mean, you appreciate that I'm not asking to challenge your evidence in any sense, except to try to understand it and what I take from these various figures. And at the moment, I'm not entirely sure, but just as you're not, I think, entirely sure from these figures how it all fits together.
I'm sure that the data in the table here would have been an accurate reflection of what the technician found when he went through the individual batch records. What I'm having trouble doing in my head at the moment is relating it to the batch size, the donation pool size that was being requested at dates along this table for inclusion on the label.
Well, if you have any thoughts about how the two might fit together, please do let me know, because I'd be very grateful. You're the one person who might be able to help explain it.
I shall, sir. Thank you.
Anyway, we'll take a break now until 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock.
Thank you.